Hi, everybody. Welcome to another UH Studio Architecture podcast. And in this episode, we are joined by Arturo Tedeschi, who may not need an introduction because if you know anything about computational design, you probably have already heard of him or read his books or looked at his fantastic galleries. But I'll just say a few words about him in case you are not familiar with Arturo. So he's a computational designer and a Grasshopper expert, and he's the author of the AID, Algorithmic-Aided Design and Parametric Architecture book, which was for a long time the Bible of Grasshopper. I personally have a copy and use it extensively when I was learning Grasshopper. And Arturo is involved a lot with architecture, but also with design. So he works with furniture, automotive, with installations, products, and footwear. And he's also very adaptable, it appears, from what we see currently on your Instagram, Arturo, in regards to adapting new technologies beyond what you are an expert on. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dimitar, for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be with you and in your channel.
Great. Yes. Thank you for joining us as well. I mean, you're one of the persons that I think led the whole computational design field initially.
Well, it was not planned actually, because when I graduated, I started my career as I like to say 1.0 architect, meaning that I was using, standard tools like CAD or 3D modeling software, but I was not interested in the emergence of, new tools, new paradigm. I like to say it was a happy accident. I was in London one day and I stumbled into an installation designed by the Architectural Association. It was a free-form sculpture that really changed everything, because I said when I stumbled into sculpture, I want to do this thing. I want to be this thing. And then I started studying everything by scratch, There is a sentence, an important quote by Ludwig Wittgenstein, and he said, "The limit of my language is the limit of my world." And so I really understood that my work as an architect was limited somehow because there was a limitation in my vocabulary, in my language. So I wanted to expand it. And parametric design, generative design, really fascinated me at that time. But it was a completely different world, It was very complex at the time to access information. YouTube was there, but was completely different. We didn't have so many resources out there. So I really started doing work as an independent researcher. I was working in the day and I was researching at night. I like to say that I was like Bruce Wayne and Batman, Bruce Wayne in the morning and Batman at night. And I started to create my superpowers by studying everything. And I collected, a bunch of, researches, papers, and I started connecting the dots. And so the first book that I published, Architettura Parametrica, that by the way is here, this one, no longer available, is like a pamphlet, it's very, very small.
Still got 100 pages in there, doesn't it?
It's something like, because at that time, also the publishers, they did not believe so much in this kind of approach, in this kind of topics. And so it was really hard to find someone that gave me the possibility to publish, something like this. And the book was written and published in Italian. Again, Architettura Parametrica, Introduzione a Grasshopper, that means introduction to Grasshopper. That was pretty new. The very first version of Grasshopper, named Explicit History, was born in 2007, and the book is 2009. So it was a great challenge because, it was a completely different context at the time. And so everything started from that.
It's crazy to think about that Grasshopper has only been around for 14 years. Where it feels like it has been forever, and I can't even imagine how to do half of the world's complex forms without having access to Grasshopper these days.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you. And when I started, it was a kind of serendipity, you know, having a new platform where you could combine 3D modeling, but also research. When, for example, a plugin like Kangaroo was released, I really felt this, I had this feeling of having a research platform where I could combine points, curves, but also simulating, forces, attraction, and everything to me was a driver to explore new shapes and new methodologies to achieve amazing design. Because I always approached tools from a designer standpoint.
Hmm. So that's great to hear how you got involved with it. I imagine it was probably one of the emerging technologies pavilions at the AA that you saw back in the day.
Yeah, designed by Danesha Sibingo. She was a young student supported by the AA school. I think there was also Arup involved. The project was the project's name was Driftwood Pavilion. It was made by plywood. But something that really blew my mind at the time was feeling that you could achieve something using a kind of DNA. Because as I told you, at that time I was working as a traditional architect with traditional tools. And everything was about connecting together, plans or columns, but in general, flat surfaces together. And having this idea of shaping design or architecture using some DNA, some energy that put everything together was really incredible for me. And that's why I really decided to switch my career completely. Today we talk about computational design, but back to 2009, it was not a profession, it was not even a word or a definition. At the beginning, using Grasshopper or using parametric tools was, as I told you, just as a superpower, something more to explore shapes, complexity, to solve complexity. But I didn't think that you could create a career on top of this new paradigm.
But you have created a career for yourself on top of this new paradigm, right? So how did that come about? I guess so. You were an architect 1.0, and then I suppose Arturo 2.0 came out, Batman with his grasshopper skills, and
Superpower, yeah.
you did you start collaborating with people, or how did you sort of popularize these new skills? And more importantly, because people weren't aware of them at that point and the capabilities that they can give to designers, I suppose you also had to popularize that, right? To make potential designers and architects aware of what's possible with these tools, right?
Well, I guess 15 years later, I can understand the puzzle. It is a puzzle of different, but yeah, only now I can understand. There are so many pieces that I was lucky. That's the real answer. I was lucky to put pieces in the right order. First of all, I had to support myself financially, because as I told you, I switched from being an architect and I worked in the world of architecture for 5 years, designing, interiors, architecture, collaborating with different offices at the beginning. And then in order to do that, to support, financially my activity, I started doing teaching After the first book, teaching was an important part of my evolution, also as a human being, because having this relation, I was not used to teach things to people because I'm not a formal researcher. So it was a great experience as a human being to have a connection with young professionals, with young students. And I really get something back that was really important. First of all, a lot of questions. And those questions were the basis, for example, for my second book, AAD, Algorithmic-Audided Design, that really changed my life. First of all, because I spent 2 years in writing that book every day for 8 hours. It was really a great commitment. So I was teaching parametric design, Grasshopper, mainly in Italy at that time. And then I published the second book. The second book was really an international success, mainly because it's the only, and it was and it still is the only book on parametric design with kind of, I don't know to say, I always think that a book should be like a path from zero to hero. You open the first page and you don't know anything about the topic. And then you close the last page and then you learn something using a kind of, there is a presence, the presence of the author that guides you towards this kind of path. And then the book was really, again, successful, and so many offices and brands, they started, having the book on the shelf. And so people, they started calling me for that. And my consulting activity was born in that way. So basically the book was a hook, a link, a bridge between brands, companies, architecture offices, and the story started like that, basically.
It sounds like a massive investment. 8 hours every day for 2 years.
For 2 years, maybe also 2 years enough. Yeah, it was really it's a great commitment when you are working on something and you don't know how it will be after the publishing. It's a kind of blind work, because you are not getting any resource, also financial resource, meanwhile you are writing. So it's really a huge commitment in terms of personal resources, energy, psychology. You need to have a kind of mental attitude, which is really something that I cannot do in this moment, for example.
But it's a huge commitment, definitely. And you clearly had the vision that what you're doing is important enough that people would probably pay attention to it. So I imagine it was that vision that was, the driver, and clearly the dividends really paid off.
But the main driver, I know that maybe it sounds kind of pretentious, but it was a philanthropic attitude. I really wanted to share the possibilities that a tool like Grasshopper give to people. That was really important, because it changed my life somehow. I really consider Grasshopper like an extension of my hands now. Everything that I'm modeling, I'm creating, it's based on that platform. So I felt this revolutionary approach, and I really wanted to share with people, but through a precise lens. And this lens is the lens of a designer, someone that is not a programmer, is not a coder, not something completely involved in the technical part, in the mechanism, but someone that wanted to leverage the potential of parametric design to influence the production, the ideation of things. That was really important.
And throughout the process, it appears that you really are first designer, and then you do whatever it takes to help your designs. So whether that is Grasshopper or Midjourney now or ChatGPT and so on, because some people, some former colleagues of mine, and I'm sure of everybody's, they started young as architects. They discovered that they quite like coding, right? And they went down the other path, which is an accepted path now, computational design, and they committed to it full time to work as either developers or in a research cluster at like Foster's or Zaha and
Yeah.
so on. But so do you see? I suppose you see yourself a lot more as a designer than a technologist in that sense.
100%. It depends on my background, my passion. I have there is not a coincidence between my passion and my daily work. I mean, my work is influenced by movies, music, art. They are the main driver. I don't know to say, I fuel my activity with other arts. They are my main reference. But I need superpower to translate all this imagery of forms or inspiration. And so if I want to turn them into something real, I need tools, new paradigms. I need to explore the current technology. And but they are separate moments. I always divide the moment of ideation from the process itself. I try not to overlap them. So, for example, I like when a piece of design is influenced by something which is outside the technology. There is an installation that I designed for Adidas 2 years ago for the Adidas Berlin store. Is a sculpture and an installation that talks about the kind of recycling loop, starting from wasted materials into particles, into filaments, which is a recycle loop. And this installation is 3D printed. It uses somehow the state of the art of technology in terms of tools, because we use Grasshopper and other voxelization tools. And then the state of the art of 3D printing, because it's a major object. We are talking about 17 meters of 3D printed sculpture. But the reference, the influences, they are completely outside, the technology. It's not a lattice. It's a kind of sculpture that also a sculptor from Renaissance could do, by carving the materials. So we use the technology, but the ideation moment was completely separated by the process. This is something that is really, I believe it's really clear in my work.
Can you expand a little bit on that? So by the ideation, you mean the initial concepts and just being perhaps as free as possible?
Yeah, I believe that when you are in love with the technology and with the process, and I am somehow, but if you are totally, if you embrace completely the technology paradigm, you have this tendency to overlap these two moments that from my perspective they should be separated. So for example, I was talking about 3D printing. If you just go on Google and you type 3D printed sculpture or installation, you will see a lot of lattices or intricate geometries. Why? Because, if you are working with 3D printing, it's very cool to explore these kind of shapes, and it makes sense somehow. But in general, you see a lack of creative power on that, because, it's just the process that leads to a final geometry. So when I create something, when I speak with clients, I always have a moment where the creative energy, the concept stage, the mood boarding, it's completely separated by the technology I'm gonna use. The tool or the fabrication methodology I'm gonna use is something completely separated. So I have a moment where, again, art, movies, cinema, music, art, everything guides me in a kind of sometimes also of irrational way. And that's the pure energy. You were mentioning my recent work, for example, also with AI. I believe that AI is putting designers in this new dimension where ideation is completely separated by the process itself. So it's very easy nowadays to create amazing concepts using, for example, text to image platforms. And so you are forced to think about what you want to achieve, and later on you start, your 3D modeling tool or your Grasshopper definition, and then you start converting a concept into something real. But the moments are really separated. To me, this is very important, probably because I have a background as an architect. I studied in a completely different scenario where the ideation was a moment fueled by, as I told you, references completely disconnected with the process itself.
Yes. Okay. So, in other words, you see the ideation process as a free process where it doesn't matter. Like, you're not concerned about how you can achieve that. What you're concerned is to have the right references for the design aspect of the project. And only after that do you start to think, okay, I can do this in this way with this tool or with that tool, and so on and so forth. But as opposed to starting out like what you were mentioning with lattices, in the sense that, okay, I know what this tool is capable of producing, therefore I will show a couple of those examples to the clients and see how we can maybe improve on that, but it might not be completely relevant to the current design exercise that you're in the process of doing. Is that more or less
Yeah,
right?
yeah, definitely. But I like to mention Cedric Price that was saying technology is the answer, but what was the question? So this is
Yes.
something that I always, this is written on the walls of my office. Technology is always the answer, or always in 98% of a situation is the right answer. But it's important to come back to the original question. So if you mainly work as a consultant, as an insert for companies, you start with a brief. You have a responsibility sometimes in for example, in product design. You need to create a project or a product that works in a specific market. So there is a lot of research and work that should be carefully guided, and you have to be free from the sometimes from the framework that are an advanced tool can give you. And so you mentioned the word freedom. Somehow you should be free from the framework of also of geometric limitations.
Yeah. I really appreciate that you mentioned Cedric Price's quote, because as a design research lab grad from the AA, Theos Paropoulos, he beat that into our
Yeah.
heads, and purposefully so, because when we were studying, we were all fascinated by all these new technologies that we were being exposed to. And were so fascinated by it that we forgot to ask the critical architectural discourse questions about what is it that we're designing for. And I believe at that stage it was okay, right? Because we were just dipping our toes, and you do need this sort of free R&D experimentation phase. You're not specifically bound to specific architectural questions, but having those capabilities later could reintroduce that architectural or design agenda. So you use those tools as a means to answer whatever questions you or your client or your team might be asking.
But there is also responsibility from people that do education at any level to clearly transmit to students this this concept and this, if you like, this workflow. It's very important to understand that tools are a part of the recipe and methodologies are a part of the recipe. It's also always important to understand that everything is a kind of chain with so many parts that should be combined together. Otherwise, the risk is to generate every time something that is completely similar to previous works, and there is no evolution if you don't have a powerful injection of creative energy at the beginning of every design process.
Yeah. And that's where I see tools like Midjourney, for example, as a double-edged sword. On one hand, they give us all these wonderful opportunities. But on the other hand, if you don't have, a question to ask it, and you just say a pretty building sitting on a lake that's twisted, right? It will produce wonderful, wonderful results. Then the question is, what does that mean? And is that a design exercise, or does it help the designer become an artist? Or perhaps we're still early on in the sort of research phase collectively.
Well, I guess there is a huge fascination for these tools, mainly because they have a very low barrier to entry. Everyone can use them. Differently from a tool like Grasshopper or like Maya or like Blender, everyone can easily use Midjourney or DALL-E also on a smartphone, on a tablet computer.
Yeah.
And then you get a kind of instant gratification. This is very important. You can easily be gratified by the result, but this is just the early stage. I believe that designers, they will start using different tools. For example, I'm now exploring all the possibility of stable diffusion. This is still a text to image generator mainly, but with parameters you can really fine tune the result. It's a combination of text prompts but also images. You can combine settings with really few subtle nuances in terms of language, and so the result, it's guided, is not again a kind of happy accident or a serendipity. And Midjourney just opened the Pandora box somehow. But I deeply believe that the designers are gonna use these new possibilities in a wise way.
It's the future in a way, isn't it? I mean, you have to, otherwise you'll be left behind. Everybody, well, not everybody, but the media can easily over exaggerate the dangers of AI, in terms of taking away jobs and so on and so forth. But to me, it's similar to what happened with CAD and with BIM in architecture, right? We thought, okay, our work is going to get easier because we have these wonderful tools that is faster to produce the results. But then the clients also became smarter, and they asked us, to do 5, 10, 15 variations instead of 2, because they also knew that we had the capabilities. Now, what I'm foreseeing is with Midjourney or with AI in general in regards to architecture, it will be a similar path, right? It's another evolution which hopefully gets a better alignment between the architects and the clients to produce better results, but the clients are also going to get smarter. So it's not just the architects and the designers.
Yeah, I agree. There is something to be noted anyway. I believe that this AI revolution, it's a revolution, not an evolution. If you think about Grasshopper or Blender, parametric tools in general, they were based upon the Bezier formulation, basically. Also in advanced parametric tools, you were still working with points and curves, So it was really an evolution from Bezier formulation, NURBS, and then CAD software, BIM, 3D modeling, let's say Grasshopper, Blender, and etc. They are tracing a precise line. AI works on a completely different formulation and paradigm, which is something really closer to the way our brain formulates things, which is finding latent relationship between data. When we create something and we come back to the ideation phase, when we come back in that specific area, we connect dots in a kind of irrational way, And these new tools, they do the same thing because we have incredibly vast database of information. And when we type something, these tools, they start connecting dots, and they came up with an image or a sketch in a few months, also a 3D. And so it's not just an evolution, it's a completely different way. And there is another silent revolution that few people are noticing, that they are changing the human computer interface and interaction, because we are not using anymore our hands. If you are in Rhino, if you are in Grasshopper or Blender or a simple CAD, you are still using your mouse, meaning that you are still a monkey. You are a monkey with an advanced tool, but you're using your finger, you're using your hand, you are still a monkey. So the silent revolution of Midjourney or DALL-E is that we are starting using the language. This is the real revolution. In a few months or a few years, it will be a direct connection with brain. Recent news from Elon Musk is that they are going to test this kind of brain sensor, a device that can be connected ideally with to the image generation platforms, for example. This is something possible, So this is the silent revolution we are living, a new way to communicate with the computer. The very successful Midjourney, let's say a part of the success of Midjourney is, of course, in its quality and the quality of the final images, but also the fact that it works inside Discord. Discord is a messaging tool, but we can say it's a social network. And we have nowadays we have this kind of social posture. We live in social networks. We create something, we share it online. And so Midjourney works inside the social network, and it works using the natural language. That's the real revolution. That's why everyone wants to explore, ideas or just, to generate images out there. That's why, to me, it's just the first step of a new path, in the world of technology, and that will support, of course, the design and architecture world.
Interesting that you see it that way. I say slightly different. For me, it's very much an evolutive tool than a revolutionary tool, in the sense that it still promotes the same relationships between designers, the design, the client, and also the construction capabilities. Because in order for it to be completely evolutionary, we would also have to think about how AI takes a hold of the construction process, right? Because we're a little bit bound by that at the moment, in the sense that if we design something and we want that thing to get built, we have to look at, depending on the scale, on either traditional methods, panelization, 3D printing, but still of assembly processes. And those are, how shall we say, finite and kind of bound by the current rules that we have. But it's very interesting what you propose or what you say, because I can almost foresee that in the future in a way where, okay, we have now a construction process that's also bound by AI. So it's not, experienced engineers that are coming up with like the joints and measuring this precise weights and so on of the construction pieces that we have, but it's also AI that's doing that. And AI is, you plug in the design and the idea, and then AI comes up with the design, and maybe the same AI or different one then comes up with the way that that could be built in a completely new and different way. So yeah, that's really interesting. It would be interesting. I keep saying that word, but it is. It will be quite useful to know though how that would clasp on with government regulations and so on, right? Because buildings and habitable structures, they have to have some standards in mind. And it might be the perfect example, actually, is the Zaha staircase at the Venice Biennale 2 years ago, right? Really beautiful structure. It was using some very innovative methods that were also rooted in ancient technologies of just plugging pieces together. But the Venetian government, decided that they
Yeah.
don't know how well it is, and they decided that we cannot allow people to climb that because we don't know if they're going to fall or not.
But I remember that I was working on a, let's say, kind of NDA super secret project years ago in Mozambique. It was a project for a resort, and we decided to go to use 3D printing and creating 3D printed shelters using the local sand. And everything was ready. We had the design, we had also the all the engineering calculation. Everything was fine and working. The problem was the government, because it was a completely new technology, completely new way to build a structure, and so the project was stopped for that. So sometimes, the technology is more advanced than regulations, of course. But this is it's a story that repeats itself in the history of the human evolution and architecture specifically. But there is something important to say, that in general, when the work of designers and architects is translating ideas into real things. So you can simplify the whole process in this simple bridge. And we have traditional processes that, for example, in construction nowadays, and every time you add something new, like parametric design 15 years ago, and now AI, you will always feel this kind of, I don't know to say, friction between different moments. When we started working with parametric design, the usual answer was, it's not possible to build this. And then, for example, 3D printed was a great partner at the time for realizing concepts or also pieces of real architecture. And I'm sure that AI will also help us in imagining new way to build things. It will be also a tool that will guide us in imagining new ways to build architecture. That's also interesting. And there will be probably a paradigm shift. And again, we still think that nowadays, if we generate a cool project with an AI tool, we open Rhino maybe, and we try to replicate that thing using curves and points and surfaces and etc. But in a few months, we will probably get 3D models directly from a text prompt. And so also the NURBS formulation, all the Bézier world will be probably overcome, because we will have new ways to represent geometrically our reality. I'm sure that, for example, voxel-based geometries will be the future. Voxelization, the idea of working with three-dimensional pixels combined together, that will be probably one of the most interesting paradigms of the next future. We won't probably use anymore, complex curves and surfacing, and because we will automatically get 3D models from AI platforms. And so also that part will be completely changed.
Yeah, it would be for the 3D modeling part. We have to see. It would take a couple of years, I think. Even if it comes up in a few months.
Yeah.
Because we always iterate, right? And it's the process of iteration that's really important. And as you said, stable diffusion is something I also experiment with, and I've also started making some videos on it because of the easy power that it does provide working from a sketch and transferring that sketch into a vision. And it has to be that way, doesn't it? Because we do have to have a starting point, not just a Pandora's box of picking different ideas. And I suppose it's the same with construction and evolving those designs iteratively, right? So you start with a vision, you go through 50, 60 iterations, who knows, 1,000 soon. And then you pick, the ones that satisfy the design criteria. And then you move on to the next phase. And then with the next phase, it's okay, how do we rationalize that? That's a typical process now. It's like, okay, we have 3D printers, fine. What's the bed volume of the 3D printer? And how can we print in the most optimal way and so on? So it would be an evolution if that process. See, it's difficult to propose that for it to be created from AI because it's also taking away from the designer, though, doesn't it? Because that's very important for the design process of knowing how things come together.
Yes, definitely. As I was saying, it's a chain where every step is connected with the previous one and with the next one. So if you are an architect, you need to have a systemic vision. So it's important to have all the places under control, but this is really trivial.
Yeah, let's hope so. And do you do any pure scripting like Python or C#, or do you see it almost as irrelevant now for designers with tools like ChatGPT?
Well, I use Python basically for speed up some operation and within Grasshopper scripts. It's really hard to create iterations, for example. If you work with Grasshopper, that is a visual scripting, has a visual scripting logic, it's very difficult to repeat a process n times, for example. So I basically use Python to speed up some process. And I'm also, for example, exploring the possibilities of using, and let's come back to AI, ChatGPT to produce Grasshopper code, or to be precise, Python codes for Grasshopper. And that's there are still so many limitations, so many bugs, but it's interesting also the debugging capabilities, for example, of ChatGPT, and I'm like enjoying this idea of speeding up twice the process. So maybe doing an iteration within Grasshopper, but getting the script from an AI tool.
You inspired me when I saw your post to try to do some geometry based scripts from ChatGPT, and I did try it with Grasshopper and with Blender, and also I did it for I'm working on a course at the moment, and with courses there's subtitles, and anyways I needed some scripts for splitting the videos and so on, so I asked ChatGPT, but I spent maybe 8 hours directing ChatGPT to get to the right sort of script. Still had some issues. Have you had some challenges like that too in your ways of using it?
Yeah, of course. But you can learn a way to formulate the right question in order to get the right code. There are still so many problems. Sometimes, you get some line that doesn't work. It's important to know some Python if you want to properly combine, the result from a chatbot and a tool like Grasshopper. So it's not, again, a blind or simple process. You need to have some simple Python skill to leverage this kind of possibility. But yeah, in general, coding is a way to speed up some process to me. I also think that sometimes there is also some issue connected. If you are an architect and you start thinking about if you are in a coding problem solving, you are probably getting some distance from the real problems that are, the space concept, materials, how to combine things together. It's we as a designer, I prefer to solve problems connected with architecture and design rather than coding, and visual scripting to me was revolutionary for this precise reason. The two are more focused on the result rather than being sometimes lost into lines and lines of codes, because this is not our profession. Again, my standpoint is always the one of a designer that uses technology to achieve some result. And so lines and lines of codes to me can be a way to lose yourself in a sometimes in a very intricate maze. It can be a way to create a distance from the designer and the real problem.
I completely appreciate what you're saying, because I have been there and I have been lost in code, right? Trying to sort it all out and script it as automatically as possible. And I do think, though, it is important when starting out to 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 allow yourself the freedom a little bit to explore the code a little bit deeper. So when the real design exercise comes, you're a bit more aware of how to handle the problem more accurately. And back to ChatGPT, for architecture, for general scripting, it's definitely revolutionary, because it does allow that people like you're saying, I don't think architects should be coders, right? But having some Python expertise would go a long way now, especially with knowing that you need something very custom and you're not sure how to do it. You have to hire a guy or a consultancy to help you with that, or you just plug into ChatGPT, maybe spend a day or two trying to experiment with what it's capable of giving you, and then you move on with your design. So in that sense, there's definitely a lot of opportunities in exactly the kinds of work that you were showing.
Yeah, and there is also a kind of metaphor in that. If you think that 15 years ago, advanced computational tools and methodologies, they only belong to, the so-called avant-garde offices. You mentioned, the clusters at Norman Foster or at Zaha Hadid at the time, and only few organizations were able to explore and to use these methodologies within their standard pipeline. Nowadays, everyone somehow, also small offices, they are leveraging the possibilities of parametric design or advanced modeling. And it means that everyone should create a specific workflow leveraging different methods, and Python is one of them. Coding is one of them. If it fits your process, it's perfect. If you don't waste your time and if you don't struggle in understanding that, yeah, it's absolutely fine. But again, I believe that a part of if you consider the last 5, 7, 8 years, we can clearly see that let's call it the struggle, or anyway the time spent in enjoying the tools or understanding the tools created this overlapping between, again, ideation and process. And sometimes the effect is millions of buildings that are always the same, or millions of products that are always the same, with the same patterns, the same parametric aesthetic and language, towers with torsions everywhere. And that's the risk that you fall, because if you struggle for something at the end you get this kind of Stockholm syndrome, that you fall in love at the end for the tool you struggle for. And so that's the main problem connected with sometimes with advanced tools. They create this kind of distance between the ideation and the effect.
I met at a conference once this Italian fellow whom you may know as well from Sicily, from Palermo, who's doing a PhD on exactly that, which is to say the final result could be strongly associated with the tool that was used. You know, like Grasshopper projects look like Grasshopper projects. Maya projects look like Maya projects.
No, it's really interesting when you see a project, both either a product or an architecture, and you don't understand which kind of tool was used. I can clearly see this effect in the work, for example, of Herzog and de Meuron. You don't really understand which kind of method was used, or Thomas Heatherwick as an example. I really like their approach because you can clearly see originality, the idea of pushing boundaries in the correct way, and a massive use of advanced technologies. But they are really articulated in a really sophisticated way. And I really like that kind of approach.
Yeah, so Heatherwick is a great office, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because Code Drops the Art, if for those that may not be familiar, this is a project in London from basically two old train warehouses where the roof was completely merged. And the process to create that involved a ton of paper models for them to find the right expression to get to it. They were not concerned with what's possible to build or what is not impossible to build. They were really concerned about having the right idea, design idea that works with all the design parameters that they set up. And then they continued with that process and realized ways through Grasshopper to build it.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And I like that project specifically. And there is out there a collection of projects that somehow they give us a precise direction of what architecture and should be. Again, the fascination for tools and complex processes, I believe it's a transitory stage, and with the new AI tools will be probably we are going toward a new stage of creation where creativity will have a new impact in a completely unexpected way, I believe.
So about design, going back, you have dealt with architecture, with automotive, with fashion, and installations a lot. And do you see a lot of overlaps in the processes of approaching for one design exercise to another? And do you have a preferred sort of design direction that you would rather work more in, or do you see them all as sort of like these equals which require great design input?
Well, I like to say that I have a material technology wanderlust. So I never adopted one manifesto or one technology or one material. Every project is and every brand or company I worked for was an opportunity to explore something new. In general, my activity is about consulting and also doing some design project. I try to do a design project like installations, as you mentioned, every year in order to explore something which is disconnected from any kind of program. I want to be free to explore new technologies and put them all together. For example, 1 year ago, I worked for an installation where I connected 3D printing with blockchain technology, NFT, something that was almost impossible to explore for a commission project. So in general, I like to I take every project as an opportunity to explore new materials, new technologies, sometimes also design tools. And you can clearly see from my portfolio where it's really difficult to find two projects that are similar. And sometimes it's also a problem because you don't create a language that can be risky if you are a designer that works in the market. So the fil rouge, the connection mainly is in the way tools and methodologies are used. For example, something that you can clearly see is are the references that come outside the discipline. This is something that really want to explore anytime I create something new.
So back to the Adidas pavilion that we started talking about early on, the 3D printed recycled plastic. So
Yeah,
as you did say 3D printed, or did I make that up, by the way?
3D printed. Yeah.
3D printed. Okay. So what was
Yes.
the process like of constructing it? Was it, I imagine you said 17 meters, so I imagine it must have been 3D
Yeah.
printed in parts of
In
separate
parts. Yeah, you're right.
elements.
Yeah, we had this freedom to explore the geometry the geometric aspect at the beginning, and we really used 3D printing as the only possible way to achieve that kind of complexity. And the process was 80% ideation and 20%, 80% ideation, 10% translating the idea into a printable model, and 10% printing. Again, this proportion is it's a way to describe a recipe where we really try to create something new. And if you the project was created in 2020, it has to me the energy of digital art, the energy also of the aesthetic direction that tools like Midjourney are creating. It looks like a project created with Midjourney 2 years before Midjourney. So that's very important to me. It's really sophisticated the way the concept was completely kept in the translation to a physical product. Yeah, we used, of course, everything was created into several parts. Something which is a mandatory approach in my work, I don't like to show the connections. I really, my ambition is to create always the so-called seamless design. I don't like to show the tension in objects. You have tension, you have forces, you are bending stress inside things, but I like to hide it. I like to create a kind of equilibrium in the final result. So the installation is a kind of flow that goes between columns and beams for 17 meters again. But the tension was solved. I always like to say that with computational tools, you need to solve complexity, not to rather than represent complexity. So all the tension of materiality, all the tension about gravity, it's solved internally by hiding all these kind of things. And the final object is an installation that looks like a renaissance. It has some renaissance attitude, something that it's really precise, that stays in equilibrium. It's also suspended. Um, and I always try to solve the problems like hiding the mechanism, the mechanical part.
Yeah. So very anti Sancho Pompidou, the opposite approach of that.
The opposite approach. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's the opposite direction, because again, I guess it's a periodic thing. There are periods of the history of architecture and design where the showing out the mechanism coincides with the language itself. The high-tech architecture was all about showing off the muscles somehow. So removing the limitation, there was also a philosophical approach. We were coming, if you think about the Pompidou that was completed in the 70s, more or less. 68 was 2 years before. And there was also a philosophical approach that was about, communicating freedom, lightness, transparency. It was the new world against the old world. And that was a really important building, also because it was a museum in the center of Paris. And then in this kind of complex parabola or function, there are moments where we don't want to show off the technology anymore. And so the message is more important than the substance sometimes. I guess that we are living a moment where communicating is the most important thing. And we want to communicate with language. Everything is about storytelling nowadays. And also projects are a way to express thing more than showing off how we make it. It's important that there are so many buildings that they are created using a storytelling that is turned into metal parts and concrete, and they communicate. Frank Gehry is a master on that, for example. If you think about the building in Prague, the dancing house, it's pure storytelling created with advanced design tools like CATIA or advanced manufacturing process and materials, steel and glass. There is a complex panelization, but that is not a building that talks about technology. It's a message. There are two dancers. It's a part of the evolution of human being, basically. And we alternate moments of communication, storytelling, and moments when we want to, express the new technologies.
Yeah, the storytelling of the storytelling aspect of architecture is something that you don't get taught about in school, and sometimes you can get even lost in the office because people think architecture is about building, right? But every client or every organization wants to have a story behind the design process, the inspiration, and the drivers to help with their own project, because clients then need to reach to other potential investors and so on to build out buildings. So totally appreciate that. And it is a ever shifting storytelling process, right? About what are the current important aspects that need to be represented best in architecture and design.
And it also creates it's a signature. If everyone, using another quote from Bruce Mao, which is, the problem with software is that everyone has it. So how can we differentiate how our design can be different from the design of other people, other designers, other colleagues? Storytelling is one of them, because everyone has a story, everyone has a story to tell, and through the message you can differentiate the design. And it's very important. And as you said, it's not something that is taught at universities. It's not part sometimes of the culture of an architecture office or a brand or an organization. And we have to learn a lot from fashion, for example, because fashion is all about storytelling. And the bridges between architecture, design, and fashion, they will probably fuel this new, I don't know what to say, this new flow of the architecture profession. So storytelling is definitely one of the keywords of the next years.
Now that you mentioned we're talking about storytelling, I worked in the office of David Adjaye for a while, and he started his work initially for designing houses for his fashion friends in London. So he does have this very strong relationship with the arts community, with the fashion community, and his buildings are not computationally complex in any sense of the word, but the office does exploit the tools when there is a need. So uh, those all of his buildings start with a storytelling aspect, which is okay. What do I want this building to represent? Who it is for, and so on. So in a sense, a little bit like Heatherwick, because I think Heatherwick is also very much about the story of the place and really making it significant if it needs to be, or toning it down if that is desired as well. So yeah, I suppose all the great architects, I mean even Chipperfield in a way, right? In his
Yeah.
muted response in a way also tells a story which is a very different story, let's say, than most of the other very famous architects at the moment.
But it happens also in product design. If you think about a simple object, which is a lamp, one of the most successful lamp project is I don't know if you ever see it, is a monkey holding a bulb. Is one of the most
Hmm.
it's produced by an Italian brand, and is one of the most successful product out there in terms of lamp, you know. And I was wondering why, because there is a message of I don't know to say. You come back home after a hard day and you turn off the light, you turn on the light and you see this monkey, which is kind of laughing. It's pure message. It's probably maximalism. There is a sculpting and design in the same thing, but there is a message. I mean, we are human being at the end of the day, so it's very important that a kind of frequency of message from the designer to the final user, it's still alive in the project. This is very important, and sometimes we forget to do that.
And referencing back to what you were saying about the different ways in the architecture profession, whether
Yeah.
it's to expose it or not. Yeah, so storytelling, I think, is a very important one as well, which gets redefined all the time. Sometimes we see it as important, and I think that's where we are at the moment. There's this kind of renaissance in a way of the importance of storytelling. Before it was all about information, 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 right? And it
Yeah.
was coming from branding as well, from fashion. I don't know about fashion too much, but now, or automotive as well. And automotive is
Yeah.
very much about trying to design something that associates it with their target audience, isn't it? Whether it's like very muscular and strong, whether it's more feminine, or there's all kinds of different ways to think about that and tie that back into the design.
Yeah, automotive is really interesting also because it is living an important transformation, which is the transition to the electric engine, and also we are going towards the self-driving automotive world, which is super fascinating. And I was talking with a guy in the world of automotive, and he was saying to me that, Arturo, why cars will be more and more fun in the future. The cars, they have a face. You know,
Yes, they
if
do.
you see a front of a car, and it is usually really carefully designed. If you are creating a self-driving car, and it looks like a bad guy, you will be scared of a self-driving thing that looks scary. So probably the future self-driving cars, they will look like a funny and calm animal or persona, something that looks really I don't know to say, that is not scary at all. And so this is interesting how a technology can guide the design of a front part of an object. Because again, we are still human beings, we have emotion, and an object can, trigger an emotion in your brain. So if you think about the Lamborghini cars that look like, a viper or like a snake with snake eyes, very aggressive. And as you said, it communicates a kind of emotion, it triggers a kind of emotion and communicates with a particular area of your brain. So every object, it's with its design feature is expressing something like equilibrium, aggressivity, or sexuality somehow, or with for example, the object that is in my back, which is an installation that I made in Rome years ago, that was created using, for example, the golden ratio as a main, geometric DNA. It communicates an idea of equilibrium or vibration. So we speak with our projects and with our shapes. If we don't do that, it means that we are just using the tools in a blind way.
Yeah, and golden ratio is amazing reference to bring into this conversation because with modern tools and with curves especially, and it has to do a little bit also with the way that Rhino's designed, right? Because with other software, pure arcs stay as pure arcs. But in Rhino, the minute you draw a circle, it becomes a curve. No, it doesn't stay as a circle unless you know what you're doing a little bit better. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah.
there's this almost a divide between old designers, which could be also very good designers, but they understand and respect the purity of arcs and curves and tangents and so on. And then maybe new designers, which are not so familiar with the old way of designing, also a little bit because of the tools and how they're evolving. So aspects like golden ratio, like fillets, with sub D modeling, they're almost not being used in a way. Do you see it as important for new designers to have the history, the understanding of, let's say, the old way of designing?
Yeah, because it's always important to when someone asks me what will be the ideal learning path for a computational designer, my main answer is, first of all, you need to understand the geometric paradigms. So starting with curves, point and curves, again, all the Bezier world, it's very important that, again, it's based upon the curves equation. Golden ratio was massively used in the Renaissance as a way to find beauty. Because, there is another concept behind, which is human beings, they use mathematics in the past to achieve a level of beauty connected in turn with an idea of perfection. So geometric paradigms, it's important to create a vocabulary, first of all, because if you are just into 3D modeling software, you don't understand what is behind, as you said, kind of operation. For example, if you go in Rhino and you create a blend between two different surfaces, but you don't know anything about surface continuity, they will be just buttons. There is a huge difference between using a button and understanding the process behind that thing. Grasshopper, for example, to me was revolutionary at the beginning because it forced you to understand the logic behind an operation, because Grasshopper doesn't have any button. It has just ingredients to create a recipe, so you need to connect things together. So I believe that it's important to know the history to understand why and how something is created. But again, it's important to understand that we are slowly going towards a new realm where the creation of models will be automatized somehow. And again, coming back to the text to 3D, that is probably the next frontier. I guess that yesterday Midjourney announced something like we are very close to a text to 3D
Oh wow.
tool. I think so. I read something on Twitter.
we keep talking about these waves in history,
Yeah,
right? So we had the Renaissance, which was all about symmetry, proportion with the golden ratio, which was very important. And then the Baroque period, right?
yeah,
Where they decided, okay, we had enough of that. Now let's throw it out the window. Not completely, just enough to start messing with people's perceptions.
yeah.
But they could only do that if the Renaissance had come, right? If the Baroque period would not be the Baroque without the Renaissance, because they wouldn't have a backbone to critique against. And it's similar today in a way, isn't it? Where we have to have that sort of history behind, and like we were saying, with understanding, exposing the guts of a building, and understanding with all the refinement and materiality that the Richard Rogers and Norman Foster put into their buildings, which is very expensive, by the way. It's more expensive than doing it covered, and then taking that back and throwing it out the window. But having that as an informing tool to design better. So it's, yeah, the history is quite important.
Yeah, and this is the role of university, mainly because we forget to, probably we didn't talk about the formal education. I believe also that the formal education in architecture schools and design schools should be reshaped somehow, because there is no the history of tools. So, not in Italy,
Mm.
I guess not in Europe. Something or someone that teaches the evolution of tools and the evolution of geometric paradigms, which is super important. As you mentioned, the transition between Renaissance and Baroque, it explains in a precise way this kind of evolution from an idea of equilibrium and then explosion. But is an explosion possible just because there was a vocabulary and a way to manage the complexity of this kind of three-dimensional and free-form shapes, thanks to the previous architecture period. So this is the role of schools to me, and they should prepare students to the current level of complexity. Something that it happens to me, that I was exposed after university to a world that I did not understand at the beginning. And so it's very important to have this learning path in school and being ready after that to understand the complexity of the current stage of design and architecture.
Yeah, it has to do with gaps though in the education, right? Because there are some specific universities throughout the world that are known for technology and advancement
Yeah.
of technology, but then there's all the other places which do not have access to people that can teach that. That's where I see online education as important, because it's democratizing that kind of education, and it's giving more people access to tools that they should have access to think about and
Yeah, yeah.
evolve their design methodologies.
And something that is happening nowadays is that each student has to create his own path by connecting the dots and by sometimes by selecting the right schools or doing a precise connection of different learning experiences, and then creating their own background and approach. It's not easy, actually, because there is a huge offer, and it's not easy to create the right framework.
It's not, definitely not, but it also, so if university sets up the theoretical questions and gets people's feet just dipped just enough so they know what's going on out there with technology, then I believe it is the designer's responsibility or desire, if they have it, to go and start learning those tools in a way that could be used in their practice, because that's what happened to me at DAA. We got taught all these amazing tools, and then I worked in an office that's not known for computational design, and I had to learn Grasshopper. Working nights and weekends, very long, in order to be able to get to a point where I knew that that tool would actually help. I knew it in the beginning, I just didn't have the skills So I had to, work very hard to build it up. And so it's a fine balance, but the history is very important. Now we're running long here. I don't want to keep you any longer. So do you have anything else you would like to mention, or any events or anything?
Yeah, maybe the conclusion of also this this point is that another thing that is happening is like the velocity of connected with the evolution of tools that we are going to experience with the AI. So keeping up with velocity will be the main skill of the future designers, students, and architects. So this is something really unprecedented. The velocity that we are experiencing, if you analyze, this is just an example, of course, just the evolution of a tool like Midjourney from June 22 and June 23, it's really unbelievable. So keeping up with velocity will be really, it will be part of the human evolution, I believe.
How do you do that without burning out? If you have, if you're a student or professional?
Having a precise direction of what you want to achieve. That's the only way. Otherwise, you will get lost again. We were mentioning the coding maze. You need to have a precise idea of the goal, and that will be the only way to, for selecting the right tools, selecting the right path. Otherwise, it will be really, really complex.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Arturo. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. We discussed so many interesting aspects, especially about AI and design, and appreciate your time spending it with us.
No, my pleasure, and really thank you so much for the invitation. It was, I really enjoyed the conversation with you, Dimitar.
Me too. Thanks.